Hello there, folks. Space Toyster here. Long time no see. I have some plans for a few videos to make about Sparks of Hope, specifically about a character or two. While putting a script together, I realized I had made a claim that I wasn't entirely sure would be accurate. That needed to be rectified, so I decided to run a few tests and crunch some numbers. For these tests, I wanted to specifically measure how much damage each character could do in a single turn using their available skills. I picked a single enemy with enough health to handle all that abuse, made sure the characters had their skill points invested into their skills that boost damage, equipped sparks that only provided boosts to stats like HP or elemental resistance, and then I beat up my chosen enemy for a turn. Then I did it 4 more times with each character to get a spread of results to work with. Since each character has different critical hit rates, I figured it would be best to get multiple results and average them out. Although 5 may be too small of a number to be accurate. Hopefully it's accurate enough. I did also calculate what each character's expected minimum and maximum damage outputs would be, so I do have a few other concrete numbers to work with, but the averages probably paint the better picture. I ran these tests at the base game's maximum level of 30. For each character's weapon, their damage is calculated with a roll. They have a projected minimum damage output, a maximum, and a critical hit, making each character's potential damage output variable. Kinda like Pokemon, if I understand how those games calculate damage correctly. And we already have a problem. The damage I'm about to present for each character isn't going to be what they're entirely capable of. At the very least, each character can dash, and a single dash can hit up to 3 enemies. With just a single enemy, the damage outputs I'm about to present to you don't paint a full picture of what each character can do. For the sake of transparency, I'll highlight what options each character has for dealing damage to multiple opponents, aside from their dash. I won't have numbers to go with those, but it should hopefully give you a better idea of what to expect of each character in more ideal situations. I'll also include my raw, unedited footage. It's a bit choppy in places and includes a few botched results, but it will have the full damage dealing process for all 9 characters. This video will contain spoilers, but only visually, so if you are interested in the data, you can safely listen, but just look away for most of it. Once we're done talking about the exact numbers that the last character has, then it should be safe to avoid spoilers. At the bottom, we have Rabid Luigi. With 2 dashes and a single hit from his Disruptor with a 60% crit rate, Rabid Luigi's damage output is quite low. He can boost that damage a bit with Exhaust, but not enough to get him any higher than last place. He also applies the exhaust effect with his dashes, and while the damage reduction does stack until the enemy hits 0 damage, he only applies the debuff to make them take more damage once, as far as I can tell. His Disruptor can hit a total of 6 enemies, so this is far from an accurate representation of his total damage potential. It makes him great at spreading super effects around, but dealing damage isn't his strong suit. In any case, I have Rabid Luigi's minimum possible damage roll at 1,773, his maximum at 2,474, with his average result being 2,108.6. Next is Rabid Peach. For damage, Rabid Peach has 3 dashes, having the second most dashes in the cast, and 1 shot. Her weapon, the Triple Troll, hits one enemy 3 times. The third hit is the only one that she can upgrade the damage for, and she has a 60% chance to crit. Lastly, her technique, the simply named heal, has no offensive utility, making Rabbid Peach the only character who can't boost her damage output with it. Her minimum damage output is roughly 1,959.6, with a maximum of around 3,233.8, assuming I did the math correctly, and she pulled off an average of 2,301.2. In 7th place is Princess Peach herself. She has 2 dashes and a boombrella that hits in a cone and deals less damage the further away the enemy is. Peach only has a 5% chance to crit, so it's generally unlikely for her damage to spike up. She can also upgrade her Team Barrier technique to deal damage when they're hit. That last bit, hypothetically, makes Peach's damage potential skyrocket. She can put 4 barriers on herself and all of her allies. Under most circumstances, you have 3 characters, and she gives a barrier to the character that helps with her team jump for 13 total. But there are also 4 summonable allies with sparks, those being a Wild Claw, Ooze, Squashette, and Scoper. They're allies, so they get barriers too, if they're in range, adding 16 more for a new total of 29. But there's more. Bowser can summon 5 Mega Koopas, and if they don't explode right away, then they can also have barriers applied to them, making for a new total of 49. Some battles have an additional ally, giving 4 more barriers for a grand total of 53. Well, the grand total before also factoring in that Peach gets barriers for herself every time she defeats an enemy with her Boombrella, and I haven't the foggiest idea how many of those she can get in one turn, and that's assuming there isn't a hard cap on the number of barriers that can be active at a time. It's unlikely that every barrier would pop in the one turn they're active, let alone deal damage to an enemy every single time. Point is, Team Barrier gives Peach the potential to do lots of damage, the second highest hypothetical damage, as far as I can tell. But for these tests, I only popped the 4 she initially puts on herself, all of which led to a minimum damage output of 3,379, maximum of 4,182, and the average she achieved during my tests was 3,528.8. Taking 6th is Rabid Rosalina. I'm a bit surprised she placed so high because she doesn't have a lot of options for dealing damage. She can dash and shoot, and that's it. But she's capable of doing a fair bit of damage with those 2 actions. Like Rabid Peach, Rabid Rosalina's Kaboomer only hits 1 enemy, with an 80% chance to crit, and her shots dealing 5% more damage with every hit. The Kaboomer alone makes Rabid Rosalina quite potent, but there's more. While she only gets 1 dash, and it's her only movement-based attack, she can boost the amount of damage she does with that dash. And like Rabid Luigi, her technique, Ennui, also causes enemies to take 30% more damage, and she can also apply it with her dash. Given the nature of Rabid Rosalina's damage output, the math I did to figure out her minimum and maximum damage output could be way off, especially since it involved a lot of rounding. So the only damage number I'll stand behind with her is the average I calculated. If I have this right, Rabid Rosalina's minimum damage output is around 3026.54. Her max is around 4458.79, with my average being around 3816.8. In the middle of the pack is the big man himself, Bowser. His damage options are the Bowzooka, a dash, a ground pound, and 5 Mecha Koopas. Since nearly all his options deal damage in a radius, he can do quite a bit if all the enemies are clustered together. Also, his Mecha Koopas can inflict the burn super effect, but since the enemy I ran these tests on resists burn, even his single target damage ended up being lower than it could have been. Bowser has a 20% chance to get a critical hit with his Bowzooka, and he can increase the damage he deals with that critical hit by 210%. I'm not sure if his Ground Pound or Mecha Koopas can crit as well, but if they can, they likely have a 10% chance, same as the chance to crit with a dash, a trait all the characters have, and the boost to his crit damage only affects the Bowzooka. Anyway, for the actual numbers, I calculated Bowser's minimum damage output at 3,145, his maximum at 4,849, and he ended up with an average of 3,994.8. In fourth place is Edge. She deals damage with 4 dashes, with each one getting 20% stronger, 2 charges of her Storm Blade that will hit every enemy in range when triggered by an enemy moving, and her sword hits each enemy at least twice, has a 60% chance to crit, dealing 5% more damage with every hit. Maybe. For a few of my tests, I rounded up the 5 enemies present and made sure Edge's sword hit the primary target first, then last. I don't know if that would have caused the most damage, or if it only boosts the damage by 5% on the primary target, getting only a 5% boost regardless of how many enemies I involved. My tests with Edge weren't always exactly the same, so my results for her might be wrong. A final note about her sword: large enemies, such as the giant Wild Claw fought in her first encounter, seem to get hit 6 times by her sword, rather than 2, which does help her against them a bit since they can't be dashed. Large melee enemies, like Wild Claws and Squashers, get hit 4 times, as far as I can tell. Anyway, for Edge, I calculated her minimum damage at 3,801.65, her max at 5,556.3, and her average was 4,660.6. Third place goes to Mario. Mario's dual slingers allow him to launch his 2 attacks at 1 target or 2 separate targets. He's got a 40% chance to crit and deals more damage if he attacks from the air. The second shot also deals twice as much damage if the first one defeats an enemy. He can only dash once, but while in the air, he can stomp on enemies 3 times, and that can give him extra gliding time, making Mario quite mobile. His technique, Hero Sight, is quite interesting. It gets 2 charges, and can allow Mario to shoot again if he defeats an enemy with it. This means that Mario, hypothetically, can deal an infinite amount of damage. Or at least enough to clear a map, whichever happens first. But since I only took a gander at how much damage he does to one enemy, he only gets the 2 triggers on hero sight, which leads to a minimum damage roll of 5,714, a maximum of 8,015.4, if I did my math right, and the average he achieved was 6,952.2. The minimum and maximum damage rolls for Mario may be off. I calculated the damage boost from his air shot and hero sight upgrades manually rather than using the numbers the game provides, if they provide those numbers, so there may be rounding errors. I ran his tests first and didn't feel motivated enough to go back and look at his numbers again. Technically, the last 2 characters both took first and second place. Odd, I know, but true. However, Luigi gets first under specific conditions, so I'll put him in second place officially. For damage, Luigi can dash 3 times, but only after using both of his team jumps. His sharpshooter deals its maximum damage when he's far away. I'm not sure of the exact distance, I want to say 28 meters, but all the calculations I ran used his highest damage output. Usually, Luigi has a critical hit chance of 20%, and they deal 140% in damage. But with his high ground perk, his crits are guaranteed as long as he has the high ground. He also has his technique, Steely Stare. It's similar to Mario's hero sight in that Luigi will shoot the first enemy he sees moving while it's active. Unlike Mario, Luigi can shoot 3 times, and his arrows go through any obstacle, allowing him to keep a safe distance while using this technique. His lowest damage roll, assuming he's at maximum range, is 8,434, with his highest being 13,377. With guaranteed crits, Luigi had the highest average damage output in the cast at 13,014. But when I took that skill off to get more honest numbers, he ended up with an average damage output of 9,338.2. And the real, actual, genuine first place goes to Rabid Mario. To the surprise of no one, I'm sure. For damage, Rabid Mario gets 2 dashes. They can have a small area of effect on them, but that doesn't help his single target damage. His weapon of choice, the Dukes, are a pair of overly large fists. They hit 5 times in a small half circle and completely ignore cover with a 15% critical hit rate. Lastly, he has Counter Blow. When active, Rabid Mario will counterattack the first 3 attacks that hit him with a linear area of effect, as long as the enemy is in range, and he'll deal extra damage equal to half the hit points lost. That means I may have cheated a bit with Rabid Mario by equipping him with sparks that boost his maximum HP. That allows him to take more damage, which means he deals more damage with Counter Blow. I didn't think of it at the time, instead seeing it as a solution to make sure he could survive long enough to get those 3 hits in, since he wouldn't deal as much with a team barrier active. And I didn't even try to use Rabid Luigi's Exhaust or Exosphere to boost his defense or anything like that. I didn't see if Rabid Mario could have survived the hits he endured without the HP boosts, so it could be possible that his damage was boosted by the use of sparks, which would make his first place finish suspect. Or not, since he's still probably at the top regardless. Anyway, when calculating his damage output, I used the damage numbers the enemies had that hit him during my tests, rather than figuring out the maximum amount of damage he could take. With that in mind, I have a Rabid Mario's minimum damage at 11,337, his maximum at 14,680, with his average score being 12,442.6. To summarize, the order from bottom to top was Rabid Luigi, Rabid Peach, Peach, Rabid Rosalina, Bowser, Edge, Mario, Luigi, Rabid Mario. There are only 2 characters who can only damage one enemy, except with dashes or sparks, those being Rabid Peach and Rabid Rosalina. Luigi is able to damage one enemy at a time, but he can spread that damage around. Mario is almost exactly like Luigi, but he is able to damage 2 enemies with regular shots. If he has his second serving perk, he'll deal more damage than he would have by focusing on one enemy. Rabid Luigi's Disruptor can hit up to 6 enemies in one throw, while Bowser, Peach, Edge, and Rabid Mario all have an area of effect for their weapons and techniques. For the most part, there's nothing interesting about the numbers I have jotted down. Everyone was ranked by the average damage rolls they achieved. Their maximum rolls, with and without critical hits, lined up in the same order. The minimum rolls have a slight difference. Peach took 5th place with her minimum rolls, having a higher projected minimum roll than both Bowser and Rabid Rosalina. My best guess for how that happened is that her team barrier provided 4 static hits. She can't crit when they pop, as far as I can tell, so all of her rolls had those same results added in, boosting her minimum while keeping her average and max relatively low. Same goes for their overall spreads. Peach is once again an exception, her damage spread being 8th, higher than Rabid Luigi's and lower than Rabid Peach's. Luigi also stands out with a wider damage range than Rabid Mario. Everyone else's damage ranges line up with their placing based on their average results. Rabid Luigi's average was closer to his maximum roll than everyone else, although I'm not sure how useful that tidbit is by itself. That's based on the raw numbers, which might not paint a clear picture, especially if I did my math wrong. Anyway, the same goes for Luigi's average being the furthest from his maximum roll. Meanwhile, Peach was closer to her minimum roll than everyone else, while Mario was the furthest from his minimum. If you want exact numbers, they're in the description. And that's all I've got for now. We have officially ordered the Sparks of Hope characters based on the amount of damage they can deal in a single turn, to one enemy. And I didn't try to figure out which sparks give them the best bonuses for their maximum damage output, and some of my numbers might be off. Kinda seems like a waste of time at this point. And that's all I got for you folks. I do hope you enjoyed watching or listening. If you'd be so kind as to consider leaving a like and or subscribe, I would appreciate it, although I make no promises about being consistent, either in my upload schedule or what content I may or may not put out in the future. Either way, thank you for your time, and have a good rest of your day.